What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the WVSports.com podcast. My name is Wesley Shoemaker, joined by Keenan, Cummings, and we are brought to you in
Hey,
part with the West Virginia rival site. Speaking of the site, before we get into some serious football business, right now on the site WVSports.com, we are having a promo. So you can get the annual premium membership, which gets you access to all of our forums, all of our premium content, which I think we both would say is pretty good content. And you can get that for 75% off. You can just go onto our site right now. There should be a big banner at the top of our site. And then when you're checking out, make sure you use code TRUST24, TRUST24. So they're trusting us, and we're trusting that we are going to get through the dog days of August, Keenan. And so with that, we had, I think, practice number 10 on Monday yesterday. And we are kind of in the thick of things here. First scrimmage was this past Saturday, and there's a lot of finding out about who's going to be what in certain roles as far as backups and finding your way onto the field with guys this week and into next week, because before you know it, we're going to be in Penn State prep week. So where are you with things just in general after scrimmage number one and heading into what shapes up to be the toughest week of fall camp yet?
yeah, I think this is always a major, big, you choose the term you want to describe it, week for any college football program. This is when you really start to pare things down. You know, guys have already started to separate a little bit when you're talking position battles, when you're talking about freshmen. This week pushes them over the top. You know, they're really going to try to challenge them, have hard practices. Then they'll have the second scrimmage, run about 100 plays Saturday, and then they'll do kind of close things out with a mock game at nighttime on Wednesday. So I think that over the next, week, we'll have a lot of answers. We're going to start to figure out, who's going to play. I mean, we might not know that, but the coaches, they're going to know that. What guys are going to play, what guys are going to be at least in position to play, to be counted on this fall. Just because they won't play game one, game two, doesn't mean they're not in the plans over the course of the season. And that stuff kind of sorts itself out over the next week. I think that you look at this West Virginia roster, there's a lot of returning experience, a lot of veterans. So there's not necessarily as many, who's going to play quarterback on this team, who's going to be the top receiver on this team, or who's going to be the top two running backs. A lot of that's sorted, but you're going to find, receiver is a good position to pick kind of what that looks like, what the hierarchy looks like there, who is the top six, who's the top eight, who plays first, that kind of deal, or running back, who's the third running back. Who's going to be a backup offensive tackle? Who's going to be, on special teams in certain sets? Who's going to be kick returner? Some of these things do need settled. And I think that we'll know those answers at least leading up to the season. We should have a good idea, but the coaches are going to know that pretty soon, and if they don't already.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, as you said, is just finding out those, not those like primary guys, but those secondary guys, right? Especially when you're heading into the September that West Virginia is heading into, where they open with Penn State, and then they have not an easy FCS game, right? And then they have a rivalry game on the road, and they're right into the thick of Big 12 play, and there's really no cupcakes there. Is that you have to be able to find guys that you can trust to put winning football on the field. And just because they might not trust you in September doesn't mean they won't trust you in November. But I think the pressure's really on for Neal Brown and company, is that because of their hard schedule out of the gate, they're really having to put an emphasis on finding out these answers now rather than finding out these answers, let's say week 3, when they're in the middle of a dogfight in a game.
Yeah, they're not going to be able to ease into this thing. Neal said that a lot, and I agree with him. I mean, this is on paper. Now, let's remember on paper, because everybody was freaking out about this schedule last year on paper before the start of the year, and then at the end of the year, it was somehow a detriment. So I know how these things work, but I think it's interesting that, like, on paper, when you look at this, yeah, it's tough. This is a very tough schedule. I've made the argument before that, this could be a much better football team with a worse record at the end of the year. And that's just kind of the nature of when you look at who all they have to play. There's not many layups, if any layups. I think you're going to win the FCS game at home. You should potentially go on the road and beat Pitt. It's a rivalry game. You never know. Big 12, there's some games you'll be favored, but there's a lot of tough outs on the schedule, and I think that West Virginia has to get ready. That's why they've made this so physical. It's part of their kind of rebrand with their identity over the last 22 months. They've really focused on kind of reinventing themselves in order to compete in a league that is like the Big 12, where there's so many physical teams, so many teams that want to run the football, so many teams that are going to play tough defense. And it's crazy because we're sitting here talking about running the football and playing defense in the Big 12. Think about 10 years ago if you would have said that statement.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a really good point of just because they can't ease into it, right? And so they have to figure out all these ways also to win close games. And I think that's why you see the emphasis on physicality, but it's also why you see the emphasis on red zone. Neal Brown talked a lot about how on defense they got to be better in the red zone and how offense they've got to not only produce in the red zone and get points, but they've got to get touchdowns out of that because just by looking at things and how competitive this league will be top to bottom, the way you're going to win some of these games is by winning game one score games, winning these close games late. And the way you do that is trying to find ways to be successful when you get the ball close to the red zone and in the red zone, and then actually punching it in rather than having to settle for three, turning the ball over, things like that. And I think that's why we've seen this emphasis on physicality. One, because they kind of got pushed around. I think they thought last year week one, but also in the red zone because they know that in these close games, the difference between 7 and 3 can really go a long way.
Oh, especially, I mean, you look at the numbers last year, it bears it out. I mean, West Virginia, I think it was 35 touchdowns on 50 some red zone trips. That's just not going to do it. And this was an offense that scored a lot of points. I mean, you look at the second half of the year, this was one of the best offenses really in college football. Crazy enough to say that. I mean, as efficient as it was, as well as it was running, they played really well, but left too many points on the board, and you've got to be able to score when you get down there. I think West Virginia, when they couldn't run the football, struggled to throw it in the red zone. They made it a focus, to get bigger outside guys to kind of pair with some of their bigger bodies at tight end, so you can throw in those tight windows and make some of those contested catches that they couldn't make last year. But it comes down to running the ball too. You got to be able to run the ball when things get tight, and that starts up front with offensive line kind of identifying, recognizing, because you're going to get safety blitzes, linebacker blitzes, everything thrown at you down there when things get tight because people don't want you getting across that painted chalk. So I think that is going to be a focus. It has been a focus. It will be a focus even well after fall camp. That's an area that West Virginia offensively, you look up and down the board, efficiency throwing and red zone. Those are the two areas where the offense, if they want to see a leap over where they were last year.
Okay, let's go back to those big body receivers you referenced. I know that we obviously did not get any eyes on the scrimmage. It was closed. It was closed to the public. It was closed to media. It was closed to everybody. However, there were some clips posted by the social media team of West Virginia football, and just running through a couple of them. Garrett Green with the pass to Cole Taylor, who made a one-handed catch, which was inside the 10, red zone. Garrett Green, Hudson Clement in the back of the end zone for a touchdown. Nico had a good pass to Justin Robinson for a touchdown. That's a guy who's a big body who you're going to try and get on the field just because of his size and length, and he can cause problems there. Garrett Green had a deep down the field pass to Preston Fox, who kind of laid out for a catch. And then Garrett Green to Jaden Bray for a touchdown, who he just kind of went one-on-one and just double move, went up, high pointed the ball, and caught it. And so Jaden Bray, Justin Robinson, those are two guys that are new, but they are new faces that are somewhat expected to be counted on in that wide receiver room. What are your takes on their potential roles and where you think they fit right now on this team?
Justin Robinson is huge. He stands out if you see him at practice. He is legit 6'4", thick. Jaden Bray, I've been excited about. Yeah, I was excited about him when he was at Oklahoma State. I think he's got a lot of skill. I'm not sure that he was necessarily used to his full potential there. We'll see if West Virginia can unlock that here. But, all I've heard is great things about his work ethic, about the way he plays hard, anytime someone is willing and ready to play special teams on top of playing a role on offense or defense, that's a good sign to me. They're fully invested, and I think you got that with Jaden Bray. Both of these guys have ball skills. I think that, Bray's kind of a more go up and get it guy. Robinson uses his size more, box people out, but both of them are options that, outside really Devin Carter, West Virginia just didn't have last year. And you talked about Hudson Clement, some of these guys that have added size. You can see it. It's noticeable in practice. It's going to help them. They've got to be able to throw the ball sometimes in those tight windows. And it was something, it was really the area that West Virginia struggled with, those intermediate short areas, especially, when they when they got some pressure and some other things. So I think as long as West Virginia is able to effectively make that jump, which you expect them to, it's been a focus all offseason, this team's going to be much more efficient when it comes to scoring down there. And it's good to see that happen, in a scrimmage type situation. It's nice to see the ball going through the air sometimes. Then, you want to run the football if you can, but teams are going to try to take that away from you. They know you do that well.
Yeah, I think the receiver room in general, it's they needed to add those two bodies just because they seem to have a lot of those similar body types of not that big but really fast, whether it be Hudson Clement, Rodney Gallagher, Traylon Ray a little bit bigger than them, but still kind of that straight speed guy. And you have to have that versatility in the room. And I'm interested to see how that room kind of plays out. I know there's a couple freshmen pushing for spots there that could see playing time, and whether it's not week one, but just in the month of September, that I know the coaching staff seems to be pretty high on. And so it's going to be interesting to see kind of who proves it there, because I think that's the one room on this team really that you can say, maybe outside the secondary as well, that it's going to be the production that keeps these guys on the field, just because there's so many similar guys to each other. Like, you have not that one prototypical high end wide receiver one, you have a bunch of dudes who are good, and you're trying to figure out who can kind of elevate themselves on Saturdays and be great for West Virginia as a offense. And I think that's the big thing of what they're going to find out over the next 20 or so days, and even in the first couple weeks of the season, of who, when they throw them out there, can they trust, and the big time spots in the receiver room.
And it sounds weird for me to say this, but I'm also kind of interested to see how much Cole Taylor's role can grow at tight end. It's another big body down there, but really for
Weird to
all
see
he did,
the guy. Yeah, he led the team in receptions last year, and
I
we're still
know
trying to find out how his role can grow.
it's a weird thing to say because West Virginia hasn't had a tight end lead the team in receptions since 1992. But look at him; he wasn't really using the red zone as much, at least throwing the ball. He's a big body; he can catch it. He's proven that. I'm interested to see how they integrate him down there, because that's something he talked about. He wants to have, and he knows he has to be able to block, a little bit better, and kind of take care of things from a strength aspect to stay on the field. And as long as he does that, I think it's going to be interesting to see what that looks like too. And not just him, some of the other tight ends on the roster.
Yeah, I think as far as just straight size, and when you look at West Virginia, right, and you look at their offense, you look at their weapons, the dude who stands out is Cole Taylor, simply because he is so big and long and he can do so many different things. You don't find that many guys that tall that can run as well as he does, that can catch the ball, that can move like he does. So I'm interested to see that too, because they've since Neal Brown got here, they've wanted to use the tight ends. They finally got the tight end that they can use how they want to use him. And so I'm interested to see how they design things. And also, just like it is for Garrett Green, Jaheim White, all these receivers, it is year two for all of them. So not only are they growing together, but they're growing in the offense and learning different kinds of scheme and being able to advance that as well. And so I think that as a whole can really help other people, like specifically Cole Taylor, take a step forward, because they're able to find things that he does really well and scheme that specifically. But also, this is going to come down to Garrett Green at the end of the day, right? Like we've said this from the beginning. It's going to come down to how well can he throw the ball in those short and intermediate routes, and I feel like those are the routes that Cole Taylor will have to feast on, right? If you can get those crossers, things like that, where he blocks the guy and then breaks off for something short, 3, 4, 5 yards, and then you get the ball in his hands and makes a miss. Like, that's what we are waiting to see, if the step forward can be taken. Because if Garrett Green can hit those kinds of throws consistently, then this whole offense can really start to get things going at a higher level.
Yeah, you made a good point too. People forget, like, this, it doesn't just come together. You don't just throw guys together. It takes time. And you saw that last year. The offense that West Virginia rolled out against North Carolina was not the offense that rolled out against Pittsburgh, or even the opener against Penn State. That was not the same offense. You develop, you kind of learn what you do best. And I think with a lot of the same guys back, the coaches have a much better understanding of how to attack and how to improve.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, right? Like, I feel against Penn State, they were very I think their play calling seemed very conservative and like we don't know fully what all we can do, and this is the first start for our quarterback in front of 100,000 people. Let's just try and play smart football. I think early in the game it was like screen pass or run, or read out. Like it was just it kind of became predictable. But then just even look to the first play of the bowl game, right? They designed it so well because everyone expected them to do a certain thing, and then boom, they hit you over the top. So that type of thing, and I think that's kind of where Neal Brown really excels as a play caller is when he can really kind of get into the thick of things and say, okay, here's a tendency, let's exploit that tendency to our advantage by going off of that or doing something that looks like that tendency. And I think you really got to see the creativity from him later in the year, and it was very bland and basic early on in the year.
I don't think you're going to have many people complain if you call the Traylon Ray play. We'll just call it
Yeah.
that.
Moving on, let's talk about understanding and kind of this pressure thing. I feel like the word pressure was thrown around a bunch by Neal Brown yesterday. He talked about trying to find guys that can get in these situations, and we kind of touched on it a bit with the tough opening. But what are like areas or guys you want to see if they can possibly handle it and step up into these roles when they're asked to this week?
I think you need to find out. I mentioned earlier, who your backups are in key spots, and backups is almost seems like a dirty word, but anymore it's not. You're going to play a lot of guys. Guys are going to get hurt. You got to have guys ready. I want to see the rotation at wide receiver. How they do. I want to see some of these young defensive linemen. We've talked about them. We opened this up. Our first one of these podcasts. I've been talking about this. I asked Neal about it yesterday. I'm still talking about it. I want to see who's going to emerge there. He thinks they could be, 8 deep possibly. Prove it. Which guys are going to prove it, which guys are going to be able to do that. The defensive backs will continue to be a concern. We've heard great things from the coaches. You expect to hear great things from the coaches this time of the year. It's kind of what they do. But we've heard great things. I've heard great things talking to people. So I want to see that group, who's going to emerge there, who's going to step up. They need Anthony Wilson back from injury, but that's expected to happen this week. So you get him back, you have a full deck. But, sometimes those injuries, if they don't cost anything, long term, sometimes that helps your team out, moving forward. You get guys experience that might not have gotten that experience. And, I think Kiki Tarnu is a guy that's benefited from that, being able to play. That's a name that I've heard. That's a name that right now, I'd have him in the mix, and I don't know if I'd have him as much a couple weeks ago. So I think that you're going to find more stuff out. Younger guys, everyone wants to talk about freshmen. I don't know. I think some of those guys are going to play. To play to what extent, that I'm not sure of. I think that you're going to have some guys play at receiver. Potentially, maybe a Day Farmer will play at receiver. Maybe a couple defensive linemen, maybe one of those defensive backs is A. Jennings. But a lot of these guys will probably be more tailored to special teams and those kind of roles to start. So I think we'll find out a lot, Wes. I'm excited about it. I'm always excited about football this time of the year just because there's so much optimism. Everybody's happy. And, the biggest complaint you can have is why isn't it game one yet?
Yeah, I'm really excited on the defensive side of the ball to see that defensive line. I think there's a lot of bodies there, but I'm excited to kind of see who can edge out who, and also the development of Eddie V. I'm really excited to see how he can take another step forward in another year here. And then Sean Martin, right? Like the body types there, the skill set seems to be there. I feel like we're all just waiting to see if he can have that big splash year, and I think he's certainly capable of it. I'm just I think we're all waiting for it to happen at this point, right? And so he's experienced, Eddie V's experienced. Those are your kind of like your two horses in a sense of they've produced in the past, and you want to see if they can produce again this year. But TJ Jackson's a guy that I'm interested to see how he can translate over to this level and try and play up and make a name for himself. I mean, transfers have worked well there in the past. I know last year with Tommy, it worked really well, really early. And so seeing guys who can hopefully slide in and fill roles there. And then obviously the secondary, right? That's transfer city is the secondary for West Virginia right now, outside of Aubrey Burks, basically. And so you're seeing a lot of guys get a lot of opportunity. And last year they hit well in the portal, especially with Beanie Bishop back there. And you're going to find out real quick, real early how well they did in the portal with the secondary guys they have back there.
Yeah, I mean that's why they invested so much there. It was a lot of turnover. You're right. So basically, Aubrey Burks, Anthony Wilson, young guys, and a bunch of transfers. And you got to hope those transfers hit. You know that's why they invested in it. That's I think they brought in 6, in the back end, which is a lot. All of them are experienced. I think all of them have 1 or 2 years of eligibility outside TJ Crandall. So you brought in experience fast to get older, to get ready to play, and it's got to be ready because if it's not, you're going to run into a lot of the same problems. I do feel like from just a personnel standpoint, they feel a lot better about this group overall, with their versatility, how they can mix and match. You talked about Beanie Bishop. Yeah, he was great, but as a unit, they had some issues last year, especially when guys got injured, and they need to be able to shore that up if they want to have success.
Yeah, depth was a big problem for them last year, especially as you got into late October and November. It was, as we said earlier, it was the same 4 or 5 guys, and after that, it was just let's hope and pray something good happens, right? And so I think depth's going to be tested early because it's you don't know how hot it's going to be at a noon kick, right? Week 1, so it can be really hot, and you're not going to want to have all those guys out there expending themselves. And dudes are going to go down, dudes are going to get hurt. It's the nature of the game, and you're going to have to find ways to bolster yourselves when that happens. So let's touch on recruiting and some polls, shall we? Let's go to recruiting first. You want to talk some just general recruiting? I know this past weekend kind of ended what was somewhat of a couple-week dry spell, but they have what seems to be most of the 25 class locked up. What do you want to get into there?
Yeah, we got to talk a little bit about West Virginia getting the commitment from Brandon Caesar. He's a guy that they really prioritized. They really wanted in this class. He had visited a few times in the spring. They offered him in January. West Virginia did a good job here. He's a kid that doesn't say a lot, really doesn't say much at all. So he kind of keeps things close to the vest. But you look at his offer list, it's kind of a who's who of college football: Alabama, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, USC, Tennessee, Wisconsin. But this really came down to West Virginia and Tennessee, is my understanding. And I think you've got to credit the fact that West Virginia did a really good job here and was able to put themselves in position to get him. He took an official visit the first weekend of June. He was kind of with that long list of players that have now, a lot of them have made up this class. And, West Virginia, it's a guy they really wanted all along. You add him to what they've got on the defensive line now, that's the 4th commitment. And I think that West Virginia's in a pretty good spot there. They could take another. We'll see to see what happens. But I think if you look at from top to bottom with the class, you got 22 commitments. Probably take a few more. I mean, I think that West Virginia likely takes, if they can get one, an athletic tight end type body to kind of fill in there, because those guys take time to develop. They're like offensive linemen. Very rarely are you going to recruit a tight end and plug him and play him. So I think if you can get one there that can make an impact, you take it. An offensive tackle type, still need that. Maybe another defensive lineman, pass rusher type, and maybe a DB, depending on what happens there. But they do look pretty good back there. So you've gone from, I think it was 4 or 5 commitments entering June to having basically the class done, which you almost have to now with how things are expedited. Because, signing day now, for those that aren't aware, is the first weekend in December. So you got to get ready, you got to get fast, because this thing will come right at you.
Want to do some poll talks. So the coaches poll and AP poll were released. West Virginia received votes in both, but were ranked in neither. I know that in the coaches poll, Penn State was ranked number 9. In the AP poll, Penn State was ranked number 8. For those who care that what Penn State's ranked. Big 12, I was surprised with how many teams they had. I wasn't expecting as many teams as they had, truthfully. Utah, top spot at number 12 in the AP poll. Oklahoma State, 17. Kansas State, 18. Kansas, 22. And Arizona, 21. So I think kind of that all those teams grouped together in a sense. There's not a team ranked in the top 5 like we've seen with Texas and Oklahoma in the past, and there's not 3 teams stuck in the 20s and then a couple teams scattered in the low teens, right? I think all of them kind of being in that range shows the competitiveness of the Big 12 this year. And I'm not upset. Let's do this first. I'm not upset West Virginia wasn't ranked. I'm not sure I expected them to be ranked. I think, though, that for a team coming off a 9-win season that returns as much production as they do, there's some people that just look past that. I think the biggest thing is people look at the defense, right, and they see a secondary that doesn't have many returners. They see a defensive line that lost a couple guys. And so I think that's the biggest thing is the defense. But I also think that West Virginia really hasn't been a ranked team in the last 5 years, and that also contributes to it somewhat of just that brand equity you don't really have as much because of the first couple years of the Neal Brown era. So I'm not really upset they're ranked. What about you?
I'm not surprised, just given the way things have gone this offseason. Although I do kind of see Neal Brown's point. There you go look at other examples in the past, like they won 9 games. They return a lot of production. Usually I get the not returning production. That's why they were picked so low last year in the Big 12, even though it doesn't matter anymore with the transfer portal. But that's the way you look at it. It's hard to look at every team. You can't know every team. I do this for a living. I mean, it's hard to look at other teams outside of your own with how much change happens now. You can do it, but it takes effort. It used to not take so much effort. You could open up a media guide and say, oh, look, they got this guy returning, that guy returning, but it takes a lot more effort now to know all the roster movement that occurs. Look at West Virginia. I think they've added 37, 38 players this offseason, and many of those transfers,
Yeah.
it's a lot of movement.
And there's teams that add, and there's teams that frequently add more, right? So, like,
Yes,
sometimes when you're in the 30s, you're like, okay, we did well. We didn't lose a ton of guys. We didn't have to replace a ton. Then there's some teams that are in the 40s and 50s, and they're overhauling an entire roster on a yearly basis. And I just think that that's the way college football is, right? That's the era we're in right now. And so it's the way life goes.
I do think the polls are always funny though, because it generates so much discussion, so much talk, especially from the fan base. And you always got two factions, I think, that kind of go at each other. You got the one, let's just say West Virginia is not ranked like they were yesterday. You get the one that, oh, we're disrespected. Why is West Virginia not in the top 25? But had they been ranked, you would have, oh, why are they in there? This team needs that motivation of not being ranked. So it's like a constant battle between the fan base. But am I surprised? No. I do think Neal Brown has some merit with what he's saying, given what they're returning, given the success they had last year. This team didn't do it really fluky last year. They ran the football, and they ran it effectively. And that's really, if you're doing it you're kind of imposing your will on teams. And yes, did they beat up on some teams that weren't very good? Yeah, but that's part of being a good team too. You got to figure that out. So we're going to find out quickly. You mentioned all those teams that are ranked. It feels like West Virginia plays every single one of them,
And
except
it
for
feels like they
Utah.
play every single one of them in the first month and a half of the season.
Yeah, except for Utah. I think they play every single one of those teams. So they're going to find out. There's no dodging anything. If the prognosticators are correct, the people that are voting is going to be, we're going to find. So anybody that about preseason rankings, I think that you used to have some real merit with that because things were decided off where you were ranked. Now necessarily you're going to prove it. There's a committee. There's at-large playoff teams. I don't think it's as big of a deal as it once was, but you're going to find out very quickly, if this West Virginia football team, once they get out of September, you're going to know, hey, was this team, should they have been ranked, or, okay, well, I understand where they put them.
Yeah, I think when it was the 2-team BCS and then the 4-team playoff, right? If you were unranked, it was like, holy heck, we've got a lot of work to do because we have to prove it in the eyes of the same people that are kind of making those decisions are the same people that didn't rank you at the beginning of the year. And I know the committee isn't media members, obviously, but the point being is that in the eyes of the nation, oh, you're an unranked team, you don't really deserve to be in that discussion, right? And so you have to do that much more. But with 12 teams, with the way the Big 12 set up, where the top 2 teams go play for a Big 12 championship, like there's enough points on this schedule, as you said, where they're going to prove what they are, whether that's good or bad or anywhere in between. And to your point of there was nothing fluky, I would say the 2 flukiest things went not in their favor, and that
Against
was
them.
running into the punt return against Oklahoma State and then the Hail Mary against Houston, right? And so you just don't know what's going to happen because, like, if they win that Houston game, you're telling me they're not going to rank a 10-win team that returns their 2 running backs, a quarterback, the majority of their offensive line, the majority of their receiver room. Like that's kind of the argument where I look at with you and with Neal. It's like, okay, we're a play away from being a 10-win team and possibly 7 minutes of football away from being in Dallas last year, right? And then you return all those guys. So it's just like you can keep going and saying these what ifs over and over and over again. But
I feel like we're in the
they're fine.
multiverse, though. You start doing that. If you change one thing, what if they lose at Baylor? So I try
Right,
not to play
right.
what if that much, but like the thing too, we have to make this point. West Virginia's not in the top 25, but they're not completely disrespected. They were 33rd. So at least they are getting some recognition. So I know that disrespect card is going to be something that West Virginia plays. Neal's already made that clear, but it's not like they were completely ignored.
Yeah, and who cares what you're ranked on August 13th? Because on August
Exactly.
31, you have the best chance of anyone in week 1 to have a statement win. You get a top 10 team on your home turf with the entire eyes on you, because I think last year Big Noon was possibly like the highest watched time slot and channel out of anyone. So people are going to be hungry for college football, and you're going to be giving them the marquee game of week 1 at noon, right there, right then. So much for not being ranked now. You can be ranked come September 1st or whatever it is, if they take care of business like they're trying to do.
Yeah, and I do want to remind you guys, thank you if you've watched all this and enjoyed it. We will continue to bring this to you. As I said, we're working on it. Going to be offering it on more platforms soon. So hope you
That
all,
might be today. This might be the first one. I think this should
yes.
be the first one that we get on, just not on YouTube. So I hope if you're listening elsewhere, here you are. Here's your prize. We got it.
And if you're on the blue lot, let us know. Do you like these longer ones? Do you like short form? Let us know. We'll work around what you guys like and kind of help bring you what you want. And I do want to remind one more time, we opened up with this. We got to close with it. We are running a promo right now, 75% off, guys, of a new annual subscription. That's pretty great deal. You look at the cost of that, that's a pizza or two. And for a year of WVU coverage, we'll be covering everything throughout the year, all the recruiting stuff you need to know. If you've been wondering why stuff's happening, what's going on in recruiting, stop wondering, sign up. Make sure you use the promo code Trust24 and, get on the site. We welcome you. We have a lot of great discussion with our fans, and it's a lot of fun. So I do want to say that one more time, but thanks again for tuning in.
Yep. And so that is the end of this episode. We do appreciate you listening. As Keenan said, use the code TRUST24, TRUST24. And until next time, I'm Wesley Shoemaker, joined by Keenan Cummings, and this is the WestVirginiaSports.com podcast.